Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving right into a truly fascinating essay by a writer named Su Feng. It's one of those pieces that starts with a super simple everyday mystery, in this case right in his own front yard, but it eventually blossoms into this profound philosophical realization about the human condition itself. It's honestly a brilliant look at how just observing nature can teach us so much about ourselves.
Picture this. You step out into your garden and you're hit with a complete puzzle. That is exactly where our author finds himself. He's standing there, looking at his front yard, acting as the curious gardener, and he poses a really direct question. Why do some of his roses completely thrive, while others, well, they barely survive? He's trying to make sense of this stark, almost baffling contrast between two sets of plants that he's actively been caring for.
The visual difference here was literally night and day. On one hand, you've got what he calls the guest room roses. These bushes are doing fantastic. Their tender branches have already grown out to 2 inches long. But then, on the exact same property, you have the roadside roses. And these guys are barely hanging on, just starting to sprout. It's a massive difference right there in the exact same yard.
So what's your first guess? Faced with this, the author makes a totally logical initial assumption. He chalks the whole thing up to temperature and wind. The guest room roses are sheltered, right? So they stay a bit warmer. The roadside roses, on the other hand, are constantly getting battered by the wind, which obviously leads to lower temperatures. It makes perfect sense. I mean, if you're cold and exposed, you're just not going to grow as fast. But, as we're about to see, the obvious answer isn't always the right one. Because here is where the plot actually thickens. The author finally decides to get around to a chore he's been putting off for a while, clearing the weeds around those struggling roadside roses. And in doing so, he uncovers the real culprit. It wasn't the wind, and it definitely wasn't the cold. It was unseen energy thieves lurking right below the surface.
And this brilliantly sets up the hidden antagonist of our essay. When he actually dug down into the soil, he found these weeds that looked kind of like alfalfa. But these weren't your standard surface nuisances. He found roots extending over 3 inches long, forming this massive, well-developed system that was literally tightly wrapping around the roots of the roses. Combined with other grasses, they were making the soil incredibly compact and completely impermeable. So the roadside roses weren't cold, they were being choked and robbed of their vital energy by these deeply entrenched weeds.
Let's look at the timeline here, because timing is absolutely everything in this mystery. Over 20 days ago, the author had actually cleared the weeds and loosened the soil for those guest room roses, setting them up for total success. But in the meantime, while he delayed tending to the roadside plants, those weeds were secretly and aggressively wrapping around the rose roots. It wasn't until today that he finally discovered the true cause of the weak growth. It's a perfect illustration of how a lack of timely intervention completely doomed those roadside roses to a weak, flowerless existence. And that leads to the crucial point, this massive epiphany that hit the author right there, literally knee-deep in the dirt. He realized, when powerless, seek external help. Without a powerful external force, which in this case is the gardener with his tools, to come in and clear those energy-stealing weeds, the roses are utterly powerless to thrive. They might not die right on the spot, sure, but they were trapped, completely incapable of freeing themselves to reach their actual potential. Now, this is where Su Feng takes this micro-metaphor of the garden and applies it directly to the macro level of the human condition. Just like those roadside roses, choked by weeds and completely unable to free themselves, he argues that humanity often faces similar hardships. So many people in the world are trapped in immense difficulties, wrapped up by the weeds of life and entirely unable to escape their predicament without some form of powerful external intervention. To expand on that, the essay points out a pretty harsh reality. Just like the roses might not die immediately from the weeds, humans trapped in profound hardship often continue to survive. But as the author highlights, what kind of survival is it? It's a survival stripped of dignity, devoid of confidence, empty of hope, and completely lacking in joy. It's essentially an existence of merely scraping by, perpetually drained of energy by circumstances you just can't control on your own. The essay then points to a highly sobering real-world example to drive this home, the tragic case of the young Galen family. This was a devastating event where a family of 6 lost their lives to suicide. The author uses this tragedy to impartially illustrate what happens when individuals are entirely overwhelmed by their circumstances, when they are completely trapped without any external help to pull the weeds of their despair. In the essay, it's presented as the ultimate tragic outcome of absolute powerlessness without intervention. Which naturally brings us to a pretty vital question. If we are sometimes truly powerless and desperately need intervention to pull us out of the weeds, where exactly does that external help come from?
Let's transition into the author's contemplative, philosophical answer to this dilemma. According to the spiritual worldview laid out in Xu Feng's essay, the fundamental, most effective source of external help is the greatest creator. From his perspective, instead of praying to random external forces or just crossing our fingers and hoping for a stroke of luck, humanity has to rely on this ultimate caretaker. The essay presents this creator as the definitive source of strength for when we are otherwise entirely powerless to fix our own situations.
To really cement this concept and tie the whole thing together, let's bring the metaphor full circle. For the roses, the gardener, the author himself, is the only reliable external force. He's the one who tends to them, clears the weeds, and ensures they actually thrive. In the exact same way the essay argues, the greatest creator is the ultimate ancestor and caretaker for humanity. We rely on the creator to pull our proverbial weeds, just as the roses rely entirely on the gardener.
But how does this divine help actually show up? Well, the essay outlines that this assistance doesn't necessarily look like magic dropping from the sky. It comes tangibly through what he calls the arrangements of the Tao. It might be delivered in completely unexpected, practical ways. It could literally be a small boat sent your way, a speedboat, an airplane, or even the mobilization of other powerful people and factors in your life. The form the help takes is orchestrated by the Tao, but the source remains that ultimate external caretaker.
It's a really fascinating way to reframe our struggles, isn't it? Which leaves us with this final thought for you to reflect on today. What kind of weeds are currently draining your energy? And when you find yourself utterly powerless against them, what external force might you actually need to finally pull them up? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this fresh perspective gives you something really powerful to think about. See you next time.